Okay, this is Everglades Podcast, Episode 1. Samuel's not invited. This is Everglades Podcast, Episode 1, and we have Mike Schlechter, we have John Schlechter, and then we have John Schlechter behind him, Walter Schlechter, and Bo Schlechter. And so today we're going to be talking to basically the lineage of Everglades Equipment Group and the Schlechter family. We have some special people here to give us some insight on Everglades Equipment Group, how it got started. We're going to get to hear about farming in the Everglades. We're going to get to hear our family story, which is very similar to a lot of family stories from the Everglades area and how farming got started. And so we're just going to spend about 4 hours here and ask. We will be calling him Granddad for my sake, and Mike over here, he won't let me call him Dad. So we will address you guys like that and start asking you some questions.
Some days I would let you call me Dad, and some days you need to call me Mike.
That is true. So, and I'm sure Mike will have questions. We're going to start with Granddad. And now that we have this on film, we're just really going to ask you a bunch of questions here. And in no particular order, I think one of the questions probably that would be healthy to start with is just kind of like give us a picture of how our family or how the Schlechter family got into Everglades. Take your time, too.
Amazing. A long, long time ago. They were up in North Dakota primarily, and up there everything was a section, and their cold weather, health, and everything. They had a grocery store, general store, that caught on fire, burned on. Economically, they had to leave North Dakota because my grandmother's health was not in good shape in that type of environment, and they came into South Florida, probably down into the Fort Lauderdale area.
But they heard about land available, and the fertility of the soil down here was something I think that they thought was really, really big. I had heard at one time.
Well, the fertility of the area was verbalized by my dad by a letter after the tragedy. He wrote the people back in the northwest, that this was a land of promise, and he had been told that God would take care of him, and he thought the land would be very productive.
So real quick, as I have a few questions on that, and we'll bring you back to where you were, but like you said that they heard about the opportunity down in South Florida. At that time, how would you hear about something like that?
Surprising, an awful lot of letters were written, more than we do. Everything is electronically sent now, but they would write letters. I have read letters and seen pictures where people just sat down and wrote letters because they did that more for entertainment or to convey information.
That was like a Facebook post.
Yes.
It was like an old day Facebook. That's what they're doing. They're just sending it out.
But the length of the letters, I was surprised, and what the letters... I don't know about you, but I don't have a whole lot of collection of letters, and yet I've got copies of letters that these people sent, say in the early 1900s, that explained the situation in the family and where everybody was, because in the Illinois area, there was a family there that was part of the Neuenswander family, which my grandmother was a Neuenswander, and that family was productive, and they came through there, and people's family ties were important back then. They supported each other. It's hard to understand how they reached out so far, and their means of transportation was either boat or railroad. Automobiles were perhaps a luxury, but long-term trips mostly were on buses or trains.
So that's what I was going to ask you, because the time frame here is around 1890-ish.
Or into the first century.
Right into the 1900s?
Yeah.
And then so the way that your family would have got down is by train?
Well, they might have loaded up the baggage and come, but the principal transportation would be railroad.
Right.
Yes, and not a lot of the communications imply the railroad.
Okay. And then like you said, like the family, there was a big deal for them to separate from their family at that point.
Well, they were a big family, something like 9 children over a long period of age. You know, the youngest one was born in 24, and the oldest one had to be when Daddy was 1907, and he wasn't the oldest. So the span of the children was.
So to the best of your knowledge, how many people came down when they decided they've heard about the land down in South Florida? How many people actually traveled down on this trip from North Dakota?
Well, some of them had previously. Some of them had married. You've got me. I can create any number you want a number, but I think the number probably would be in the neighborhood of 6 or 8, somewhere in that area.
That's 6 or 8, including the adults. So can you describe the family that came down? This is your grandfather?
My grandfather, E.E. Selector, and then my grandmother was Mary Selector. And like I said, they had there's a Tallman family that was in the Fort Lauderdale area, and they had some contact down in Florida. And like I said, Mary Selector, my grandmother, had breathing problems, respiratory problems, and so they were leaving the cold. And they tell me North Dakota is cold. They normally summer passes on the 4th of July, and that's it, you know. But normally the sunshine and warmer weather was part of their motivating factor, and the economic loss they had sustained up there. That area that they were from, Anamoose, was an agricultural area, so they were very familiar with that side of.
So they did know. That's something I actually have never heard before. So they were familiar with agriculture.
Absolutely.
Do you have any idea of what they might have been doing with agriculture at that point? You said grocery store.
Well, but the family that they were from, several of the people in Belgrade migrated out of that same area. The Zumps did.
Really?
Yes.
So it actually makes sense, because if you're writing letters and one group of people hear about South Florida, seems like everybody around you in that area is going to hear the same thing.
Well, that's what I said. Families were a big thing. The Zump family, the Neuenschwanders, when I was, say, at 10 years old, 8 to 10 years old, we went up there and they had a section. See, everything, land grant in that area, you would homestead it, and there would be a section a mile by a mile. And they were still farming. That would be in the 40s that we were up there. And they raised wheat.
Are we in the 1940s here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I moved up to tell you.
Got you.
People that migrated from that area. But
it's even that area. I mean, North Dakota has some of the largest John Deere dealers in the country. So it's still a pretty good agriculture area in certain regions of North Dakota. I think the Red River Valley, and I don't know where Anamoose is. I haven't looked at that on the map, but John Deere has some big dealers in that area because the farming's pretty good still in certain areas of North Dakota.
Oh yeah, right. It's a big, like I said, a mile square.
That's 640 acres.
Yep,
is what that equates to.
And they did everything there. But I mean, an example of that, during the 28th storm, it was the summertime, and things were slack in Belgrade, so Daddy was out in a harvesting crew out in the Midwest, so that's why he wasn't, when the rest of the family was killed, he was not here. But they migrated because that's what they do, labor,
so that's
work, do something.
Well, that's where I want to bring you. Okay, so we've heard about the opportunity down in South Florida, and there's a family connection through the Tallmans, you said?
Yeah.
Okay, and they get down to Fort Lauderdale. They come to Fort Lauderdale. How do they make their way out to Belgrade? And what we're talking about here is, for the people listening, is you have your grandfather and grandmother, and then let's just say 5 kids they brought with them, right?
Yes.
Okay. Because I know that the letters and the memories, they all get a little bit confusing, but it's your grandparents and then your and then 5 kids. They come down to Fort Lauderdale. What happens?
A big thing, the development of South Florida was predicated on drying the swamp out. The swamp started as north as far as Okeechobee and going over as far, but the South Florida was a big swamp area, and they built 2 major canals, one out of Miami coming up to Lake Okeechobee, the other coming out of Fort Lauderdale going to Lake Okeechobee. In return, those were tributary for boat traffic out of the area. Miami and Fort Lauderdale area was already developed and was a shipping point, but the people could come into there by boat or by railroad and migrate up the river and go back and come into the Everglades. And of course, it was a frontier. The way we heard the old slogan, "Go west, young men." Well, some of it is "Go south, young men," because of the uniqueness of the area, the abundance of water, of wildlife. A friend of ours migrated out of Arkansas and came into the area for a hunting deal and trapping, and ultimately that individual was one of the mayors of the city of Everglades. So it was people hunting opportunity and a productive and a new life. It was different.
That's interesting because so you're in Fort Lauderdale. Is one of those canals like what would run up 27?
Right beside 27.
So that's one of those canals. And so essentially you're in Fort Lauderdale. Everything south of Okeechobee looks a lot like the Everglades does today, right?
Yes.
Just natural preserve area. And then they make canals that will run all the way up to Okeechobee. And this is essentially the beginning of Everglades,
Well,
right?
to Lake Okeechobee, not Okeechobee.
I mean to Lake Okeechobee.
In case Lake Okeechobee is probably about 35 by 50 miles in diameter and stretches from about 5 miles south of the city of Okeechobee, starting Lake Okeechobee, and goes south about 35 miles and goes east to west about 45 miles in that area. And swampland was a big thing because it attracted all these birds and feathers that had that period of time. Feathers were a big thing, and people decorated their hats and stuff, and there were a lot of them, the flamingos and these that had the colorful feathers.
So they would go out there for things like this, right?
Yes.
Early on.
Yeah, but people would come in and, an attraction, go hunting, go this, go that. Of course, this was, Indians were a large part of the population on the border of this same area, so there's human rights out there too that share alike.
Well, okay, well, you opened up, so I got a question. Go ahead.
But it was, Lake Okeechobee is one of the largest freshwater lakes in the country, but a lot of what I think that the thing that these people had that most people don't understand is it was not developed land. It was, you are going into frontier and saying, what can we do? And then some of them, they understood the fertility of the soil, or they saw the fertility of the soil because they started planting. And next thing you know, they're like, this is unbelievable. And, Florida's weather is absolutely perfect for those conditions. So, but they had to make the areas to farm. I mean, we almost think it's a given today of, there's a field, let's go farm the field. It wasn't like that. It was, we have to make fields to be able to farm the land, and there wasn't this big equipment. Yeah. It was very, very tough conditions to be able to initiate anything you did out there. I think a lot of what Lake Okeechobee had early on was fish camps, if my understanding is correct.
Absolutely correct. What is now inclusive in Lake Okeechobee, what we call Ritter Island, Torrey Island, Kramer Island. At that time, there was a hotel on the north end of Kramer Island, which would accommodate hunters and this type stuff. Ultimately, in the 30s, when they had the dike and they built another dike, they raised the elevation, and that land was uninhabited after that because of the development of flood control. But the uniqueness of the area, I've heard my father say, in the evening we'd grab a machete and cut some of the road back so we would we would start with, well, you didn't start with 40 acres. You started with an acre, 2 acres, 4 acres.
And start
The house that was demolished was within 100 yards of the dike that blew out.
Right.
It apparently washed out a dike, a mud dike. We farmed a little bit of that area and what we call our homestead. There's trees standing there that go from that period of time.
But to circle back just a little bit, there was a small dike, earthen dike. So it wasn't today. Anybody that knows the area, the Army Corps of Engineers came in and developed a large dike around Lake Okeechobee.
The rock dike.
Yeah. So
as opposed to
at this point, it was more of just some pushed up material at a smaller dike. But to his point, it was some for flood control. So you had people, so Lake Okeechobee, it really outlined the definition of Lake Okeechobee at that time with the earthen dike. So that is, and that plays into at some point, he's already mentioned about the 1928 hurricane. This plays into that because that dike at that point was not the same structure as we have today.
Right. It was a much smaller deal.
Much smaller.
Which I want to walk you through that now is, the canals get you out to Belgrade. And then just a few questions I have about this is, y'all's family in particular, when you migrated to Belgrade, how much had already been developed there? When did you show up on the scene?
I don't have a specific date, but I think we have been in the area right at 100 years, so in the agricultural area, in that area. The dates, the youngest one was John Schlechter, and he was born in 1924. Now, he was the baby, and he was killed in the storm. But the area was developed. Canals were boating was a big deal. They would go to Fort Myers, and the Caloosahatchee River had been developed, so that was it was a natural.
Is that one of the two big rivers?
Yes. On the west is the Caloosahatchee, on the east is the St. Lucie. They dug the
Lucie Canal was built.
Well,
So we can see a timeline.
And you had the Kissimmee coming from the north, which was the main feeder. That was the main feeder. The other ones started becoming for transportation and then somewhat flood control.
Well, and like he's saying, I mean, it starts out as people start to get curious and going out here on boats and stuff, and then over time, the ag footprint starts. And this probably could take 10, 20, 30 years.
Well, the ag footprint is there was patches of farms,
right?
Until
remember, this is also the period of World War I. In 1920,
right.
when there's the world was just probably waking up and overcoming a battle. I don't think our generations understand the magnitude of what war does and how it makes you stop and realize the problems associated with life. We think you go to the store, you go to the car, you get this. That doesn't happen. You earn it, you develop it, you all this is part of it. Then you have a sense of pride of where you are and why you did it.
Right. Well, when you guys get to Belgrade, because I know you've mentioned it a few times, your family gets out there, let's call it in the 1920s.
I would say it's probably the late teens. I would say that's late 1918, 19.
Okay.
That's what I would say.
So then at this point, can you try to tell us about what you did up into the hurricane and then what happened in the hurricane to our family in particular and around Belgrade?
They were motivated to be productive, and apparently they didn't have a lot of resources. They homesteaded some land. They raised chickens and other things that I understand from the letter. When I was growing up, not a whole lot was talking about the people or what they did because it was just kind of a taboo subject. They were there, the land was there, and they were gone. That was it. That's about all we talked about in the storm until, say, the 50s and 60s, where I was like in my 20s. There was no discussion about it. We knew cousins were here, and some of those migrated in, but the storm itself, no conversation about it.
But I think that's more a reflection of the times in that, you know, we talked about this before. We're not talking about, well, are we going to the movies tonight? Or are we going out to eat tonight? It wasn't like that. And if they did chickens because they had eggs. And it was food.
Commodity to sell.
I mean, and it was food, clothing, shelter. That's what they were worried about: food, clothing, shelter. That's it. I mean, so when you're in that mode, it's not your self gratification probably isn't even talked about. To his point, it didn't make. I want to feel good today. I want what am I going to eat? What am I going to sell? What am I going to do to be able to feed my family, clothe my family, and house my family? You know, those were the discussions.
With the willows grew around the lake, and those were smaller bushes that you could cut with a machete or axe and clear. And the organic soils flotation, the rubber wheel tractor wasn't that much developed at that time. They had steel wheel tractors they could make a broader flotation to work the area. So the development of the organic soils as opposed to a mineral soils, the equipment changed a lot, unique to that area.
But go back, okay, so the family had established itself. It's doing its thing. It's basically surviving at this point. You know, there was no grand plan. I don't think of, hey, we're going to take over the world. I think it was just we're surviving.
Eat, that's right. Food. Motivation factor is, do you eat?
So, they build a little, like he's talking about, they get a little more land, they build a little something on the house, they put, they get another cow, they get a whatever. So they're going through these steps till you get to 1928. Again, you're doing life at that point. So you get to the event of the hurricane.
Of the original family, of the EE Schlechter family, they were all over the United at that time. In North Carolina, selling furniture and other things. In other words, to eat. Those that were around there, Daddy was the only one that stayed there, but his sister stayed there too and married, and her husband was a large farmer in the Everglades area, in the Belgrade area. So it's family-supported families.
Well, we want to hear, what did the hurricane do to the family? Explain.
It decimated it. They passed on to eternity. Our understanding, they were prepared to die. They knew the Lord and practiced religion. Apparently, the community church there, my grandmother was one of the people that participated in playing the piano there, which is kind of unique to us. My mother is from North Dakota, and she played the piano a little bit, but not to the tune that apparently my grandmother did. So
the hurricane came in 1928.
But it's a tight. The families that were there were tight. The Stein family, the Kirchman family, and the Kirchman family was a large family. All of them, their heritage implied a German ancestry.
Here's what I think. To me, is amazing. At that time, these people are already surviving incredibly tough conditions. I mean, incredibly tough conditions. Okay, they're already fighting that every day. So they come along, and Granddad, fortunately for all of us, was away on a harvest crew. So he wasn't there at the time, and most of the family was there still in Belgrade, but they were doing their thing to try to survive. And this storm comes up out of nowhere. It pushes the water to the lake towards the dam, towards the dike, and it breaks, and it absolutely floods all of that total area. So the way these people at that time, their mind worked, that's just another challenge. It wasn't like it was some, it was obviously devastating. But they said, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Just like they'd already been fighting the whole time, another, I'm sure they had, their crops probably got messed up different times. They had all these struggles they fought every day. So for them, to me, and about putting myself in that perspective, it's another struggle. Now it's massive because when the storm came through,
See,
they read letters.
They survived the 26th hurricane, and they decided it's no big deal because the 26th hurricane that apparently did a lot of damage in Miami did not do that much damage out there, and the wind currents didn't back the lake up like it did. You need to understand too, the development of the swamp land was a developer doing it, and he got in, got out, and he got his and went down the road. And the productivity of the area, a lot of the weakness in the development and their resources to do the things that needed to be done, they didn't have. But the state of Florida got no taxes from the swamp, so the state of Florida was hunting money, and one of their assets was this South Florida area. But it was a big swamp with the Indians, and apparently the Indians didn't pay taxes, and nobody else was paying taxes. So developers got in there coming from the east.
But but you're still talking about after or during that time?
No, before. That's where the canals
So
came.
that's how some of the bigger canals had already started.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Which
I didn't really realize that either.
Okay, 1 second. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a second. And really quick, I wanted to ask you, how many people died in the hurricane of 1928 in the Belgrade area? I think it is online.
At Belgrade, one of the hardest hit areas, the floodwaters rose to a height of 2.1 meters, which is 7 feet, and in all, between 2,500 and 3,000 people died during the making of this hurricane, the second deadliest hurricane in U.S. history.
Wow. I mean, that's what, for me, as a young buck, it's so hard to understand how 3,000 people die in a hurricane like this. I mean, what was it? 5 of our family members, they die in a hurricane.
Seven
of our family members die in a hurricane where it's like, I mean, I think the thing that helps me understand it is that we didn't have the news back then. So all of a sudden in the middle of the night, this hurricane comes, and it is a monster hurricane, and it floods the water over the small dike that is now a massive dike, which makes it hard to understand that. And then everyone drowns in and around that area in Belgrade. So, I mean, it's just really hard for me to always understand that story. But like you were saying, Mike, earlier, was the part that we're going to get into now is how your dad, the guy behind you on that photo, was actually up in North Dakota doing some of the original ag things that they were doing up there, farming, whatever it may be. And he was around 21 years old?
20
years old?
Yeah.
And he gets one of these letters that you guys are always talking about, which basically tells him, hey, there was a hurricane down in Belgrade where your family's at, and it's not good. You need to get down here to try to figure out what's going on. And then, I'll let you take over from here, like kind of what he saw and then what the decisions he had to make from there.
Well, I think I've already mentioned the fact that as he viewed the situation, and one of the things I remember, and we don't understand it, we think you die and you're buried, but apparently a disaster, you scrape up bodies and you dump them in the ground. And he came to his last sister, they hadn't found a body, and then they went and found the body. And he was very upset that they were the very idea that they were going to put lime and burn the body, and he wanted the body. And all of them were buried in the Woodlawn Cemetery over in West Palm Beach. But the intensity with which he wanted her remains to be respected, here you've got nothing, and you're going to make the point that this is my sister and she will be buried. And of course, there was martial law at that time, and it raised some feelings.
Yeah.
But he also heard stories about and I think a lot of it's from the dike breaking, so you had the flow of water from the lake that really was terrible, is where you got a lot of the deaths because it was a wall of water, it was like a tsunami type situation. So, I mean, there's stories of his sister or mom or holding the baby, and at some point had to let the baby go because she couldn't do it. So, I mean, it is just a story of massive tragedy to what happens in life, but I think it's incredible that
they could see those circumstances and recognize the challenge of a blessing of productivity of the soil and what was there.
Well, you're getting, and he's getting into the letter that Granddad wrote. But I thought what was awesome before he goes there is this man is 20 years old. Anybody that listens to this, think about 20 years old losing your family, most of your family, and having to make a decision of what you're going to do. That is incomprehensible to our generation. That's what always amazes me is the man is 20 years old and he has the kind of things he's already talked about, you know, the internal fortitude to say, you're not doing that to my sister. I'm going to, you know, then it gets into the letter that you probably need to get into now where Granddad wrote the letter to say what his thoughts were about this.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things is indication, as I'll reflect upon it. My father only went to the 7th grade. And when I went to school, they would always ask the education of my parents, and my mother went through high school and had nurses training, but my father came through 7th grade. But the perseverance to go ahead and put his thoughts together and convey it in writing, so much of us have a hesitancy to write a whole lot to start off with. But to do it and exchange letters back and forth, an indication that somebody did a lot of teaching that exceeded what would be a normal because of the migration and the crops and all the other things that are going on. Things went on that we probably don't really understand. The ultimate motivating factor. But if you get hungry and you need to eat, you're going to do what needs to be done. And that's what they did. I often marvel, who taught those people to operate drag lines? Who taught them how to do this? Who taught them how to do that?
Yeah.
I see mechanics coming into the area, the development of equipment, agricultural equipment. When I grew up, say in the 40s, which would be 12 years from the storm, we had a big old drag line. Daddy was a farmer developing land, and we redeveloped several different blocks of land and went in and dug rock, you know.
Well, that's okay. So this is where it gets interesting.
Well, hold on. Let him go. Just go back to the letter first and say what the letter said and what Granddad's perspective was. I think that's very interesting.
Well, that he could do it, and I thought he did a good job with the letter. I was kind of surprised myself. But the letter just indicated what the farmstead was, and there were 2 cypress trees there, and the driveway went through it, and proximity to the lake, which was like 100 feet. But he raised chicken, like 500 or 1,500 chickens. The letter, I've forgotten the number. But anyway, as we discussed earlier, it wasn't for the chicken so much, but for the production of the chicken. You sell eggs, you raise chickens, you sell. But you also can raise corn on the ground there to feed the chicken, and you have water out of the lake. So you had water, feed, an asset to sell, and a motivation to do it. And all of these other things are there. One of the first, I guess the only comment I ever heard my dad say, his father's first crop was a green bean crop of about 40, maybe 20 acres. And about a week before it was harvested, it was annihilated with a flood, with water. Yeah, again, because of poor drainage and everything else. But again, a bean crop is roughly 45 to 60 days, and to see it come on and grow and flourish, and all of a sudden see it wilt from too much water, it causes you to stop and think. Again, that went into his thought pattern that he'd experienced up to that time. But the letter he wrote, he conveyed the circumstances that existed, the bodies that were found, the one that hadn't been found, all of these things, and how everybody pitched in. The uniqueness, an anchor in our family growing up was another grocery store. The West General Store was right beside the house. Apparently the house that I grew up in had been developed with money from the Red Cross, so the houses there were, the Red Cross was in and active. The the letter ultimately applied, the names that pop up were back there, but it was a plot here, a plot there, not the magnitude that we're familiar with later on. Ultimately, Daddy sold 2,000 acres and went down south of South Bay and developed 3,500 more, and then sold that.
Hey, this is where you jumping.
Okay.
But the net effect of Granddad saw the opportunity, what he's talking about, of the land was an opportunity. So he's 20 years old. He saw it as an opportunity. He said, you know what? God has blessed us. God has blessed our lives. I believe in God. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to work this land and I'm going to make it successful.
Right.
So that was his internal fortitude and his attitude, which is
At 20 years old.
At 20 years old.
All right. Ultimately, he worked as a mechanic. He worked on a boat.
Well, this is real quick because I want to walk into this.
Because that was the period of time of the 28. They were dredging the canal, the dike. They were starting to rebuild the dike. Hoover, they call it the Hoover Dike.
Okay.
Because they were developing it. He worked on a boat. He was a mechanic. He developed his skill as a mechanic. He worked for Lawrence Welk. We're talking about all the instances. Lawrence Welk wrote several books that details different individuals from that, and each one of them have a story to tell of how the area has changed. Okay, so he ran a filling station for a little while. My mother's brother came to the area during this time, again, because they were hungry and they were producing crops here they could eat. In the 30s, we don't have any idea of not eating, but you hear people of catching a train somewhere so they can get something to eat. We think you go to the grocery store and get something to eat, but...
I have a question for you. So on a service level, he goes from a 20-year-old boy who's lost his entire family, he comes down, and then he starts to do these jobs like you were just describing.
He wants to eat.
Right. And then then you fast forwarded to where basically he had developed up to 2,000 acres.
Yeah.
You said of farmland.
Yeah.
And can you just walk us through what it looks like what is the process at that time of developing an acre of land?
Let's back up a little bit more, okay? I told you he was a mechanic. He ran a filling station. He had a partner, Krumzik. Krumzik was an older man and had a little bit of money, and he needed a young man. So Daddy went to work with him, and Daddy considered it a partnership. Mr. McCrumsey thought he was an employee. In 52, a judge said half of it is W. Selectors, half of it is Krumsey. So that split up that partnership. All right, so he went from a mechanic to a filling station to a partnership to he had his own property.
How much did he get in that 50-50 split?
A little over 1,000 acres.
Wow. Okay.
But again, what I'm trying to make the point is age has maturity and knowledge and resources, but they need youth.
Right.
In the absence of youth, old people are in trouble. Make no mistake about that. And he didn't mistreat Mr. Krumzik, but the uniqueness of Mr. Krumzik, he was of German ancestry, and he ran a farm like the Germans did. He put all the equipment under the roof, and he had a house that was big enough for him and all his equipment up underneath it, and a shop.
Well, that's what we want to hear about. We want to hear about the equipment and how you use the equipment to get an acre developed or to get land developed.
Well, they did what needed to be done. Like I told you, the organic soil was not.
So there was.
Let me interject. Some of it was, again, the biggest problem that we have in that area is too much water. Okay, that's not like normal farming in a lot of different areas. So the question was, how do you get the water? How do you develop the fields? So part of developing the fields is being able to get the water off the land. Okay, so some of what he's talking about as it went through is, and again, after the hurricane, all of the families that were left kept going through this same process of whatever you had to do, you did it. Okay, so equipment would come in, and you figure a way to keep it running. So
or
it was
put it together. You'd build it or adapt it.
so it was
They had sprayers. Sprayers. They would take the crawlers off of a crawler tractor and put it on a sprayer so it'd have flotation. But they grew celery, and the uniqueness of it, they would take a Ford truck, put a spray tank on the back, raise the elevator, put 2 wheels on the front, and on the back they would put crawler tracks on it. So you'd have an old truck with crawler tracks on it, so it could go across the field in wet conditions. And the flotation, it was needed it.
But you had so the federal government came in and developed more of the flood control.
The drainage.
So they came in with the drainage.
50.
Then during that time, they're all building up pieces of land, which all of it was. If he owned 1,000 acres, I don't think it was all farmable at that time. Or
it was when he split with Mr. Crumbs.
I know, but what I'm saying is,
he probably came out with 50 acres.
But they had to develop all of this land to be able to farm, and part of that was drag lines digging the rock, because the organic soil, it's probably at that time it might have been
6 or 8
feet deep. And
Side question, really quick: who would you buy a drag line from at this point?
it was probably left over.
No. It was Link Belt Speeder was one of them, and Bucyrus was the other manufacturer.
Okay.
Both
And
of
they
them
would
were
have sales
commercial.
guys down there selling.
But they would get you'd
Listen,
write letters. These people, we don't appreciate. We all migrate, and you know somebody that knows somebody.
Okay. All right. So keep going. I'm sorry.
or it was left over from a junkyard. They pick it up and say, because it was a governmental deal, they went and bought it somewhere. You know.
When you go into Okeechobee, outside Okeechobee, there's an old Dragonline set, and that's a Bucyrus. It was one of the ones that were
Wow. Okay.
there in the 20s and 30s that were one of the development in the area. But
So Granddad went through the process of digging the rock. That's when he's talking about developing. He would dig the rock to form fields. So you had irrigation, or you had flood control. That would allow you to do what you need to do with your crops. So that was when he's talking about developing the land. That was a lot of what you did. So most of the farms in this area have a system of canals and pumps that pump water out most of the time, not in.
Right.
It's naturally flows in. Most of it is to pump out of that area around the glades, around Belglade and Pokey and Clewiston. A significant amount anyway.
So at this point, and let's just fast forward because we could hang out there for a while. At this point, your dad, he gets to a point where he's, blessed enough to sell 2,000 acres, or he's got to 2,000 acres.
well, I think he was 57 when he sold out.
Okay. And
That was 60
who'd he sell to?
Fonhools.
Okay. And obviously he had some farm left over because by the time I was born,
Yeah.
there was still a farm.
Oh, with that by the house, he just had that the land out by 6 Mile Bend.
How many acres was that?
That was 2,000 acres.
So he had 4,000 acres?
Well, no, he had about 300 acres up by the lake. Up by the lake is what we call the home farm, and half of that, where the dealership is sitting, that was in his land. Crumsey, where the dealership is, Crumsey, where the Rock Road is, Daddy got the north part, and Crumsey got the south part. Then he bought that from Crumsey, one of his heirs, where the tractor place is now.
Okay. So now I have some questions. Let's evolve this conversation into the John Deere portion of it, because by the time I was born, we would talk more about John Deere tractors than we did about farming, or at least it was like kind of 50-50. So how does the tractor dealership start?
He had some money, and things were changing in our area. The equipment changed. John Deere they changed their engine from the old put to what tractors ought to be run, where they have vertical engines in line, a 6-cylinder engine, as opposed to, they used to have these big 2-luggers that you don't even remember them.
That's why we're here to learn.
Okay, well, anybody that, a sidebar, the uniqueness of John Deere's design was simplicity. You could change a clutch on a John Deere tractor before their new generation, with a pair of pliers and diagonals, and as opposed to breaking it apart because the clutch was external. And but they also had horizontal pistons that went back and made that old put 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 sound. There's a country music about his John Deere tractor, But anyway, in 51 or 52, Deere came out with their new generation. It could be 53 in that period of time, and with that coming available, our area, the sugar industry coming into our area, again, we get back to world politics. Cuba, the communists kicked the sugar industry out of Cuba and made it a communist nation. And our area having some history in the production of sugar. Well, they've been there since the 20s, really, but never to the magnitude that it is now, because Cuba was a producer down there, and it was...
So that was a catalyst of
Absolutely.
what we are today as a sugar footprint.
Absolutely.
Is, them kicking the sugar production out of Cuba. They moved it over here to South Florida.
South Florida, well, Louisiana also had it. Louisiana probably has an old-time history of sugar industry production. Basically, New Orleans or Louisiana has more cold weather damage on their crop, and they have to a little bit different. Florida, again, with its climatic conditions and everything, is more suited to the crop. But anyway, be that as it may, the development of a dealership is predicated on Cuba going out of trouble, John Deere changing their style, Daddy having a sale, my cousin having a barn, and a friend that was in the equipment business that was down selling us radish machine parts. So he was familiar with mechanization. My cousin was a farmer, but he had a big barn that was empty, and Daddy had a little bit of money. So all those things came together. It's really kind of unique when you think.
These things help you start a dealership. And now I just want to, let's stay service level, but I want to get from how you guys went from a farming family to a dealership in Belgrade.
Well, let me add one thing. During this time, he went off to college, University of Florida. When he came back, he was farming. So my granddad sold a lot of his land. He started farming and was farming on his own with his own land. So he had his own challenges in the farming world before he ever got into the John Deere dealership. So he was farming. The dealership was started in 1963. So he graduated in 58, I think, from college. And so he had already come back and started farming on his own. So he had his own challenges there.
See, before after he sold out, he went down south and we developed 3,500 acres. There's like 9 miles of rock road that we dug. And there's 5 sections. That's 600, and when Daddy, the sugar industry proliferated. Every time you looked around, somebody wanted that land, and Okalana ultimately got the land, and they took it before we got it fully developed, and we developed it the last thing, and then I established the corporation under Daddy's assistance, and adjacent to it 1,000 acres. So I'm farming farm. I'm finishing 3,500 acres, and he's starting a dealership over here. And my cousin and Don Williams there were 3 of them in it that went it together.
Would you say you were good at developing land?
I have a lot of experience. I don't claim to be smart, but I do have experience.
I'll tell you what, he's hard-headed and he don't stop. I can tell you that.
I mean, that seems like the ingredients.
You're battling it now, and he's also has a family at that point. He has 2 boys, real pretty quick, or he has Ken, and then a little bit of time goes by. Then he has Bill, and they're 63 when the dealership started.
So we're throwing 2 kids on top of all that. As well.
Yeah.
Okay, so now just maybe bring us through, your decisions you have to make to where, you go from Deere farming into the dealership, and just talk about that a little bit.
Well, I try to make a living. That's probably, I never desired to be wealthy, but I wanted to have enough to eat and to meet the things of my family. And this, I thought the dealership, like I said, with the circumstances that were changing, and I have grassroots there. I know most of the people involved in agriculture around that area, and I know friends that have contacts. At the time that Daddy and Don and Fritz got into it, money was short, close, and I think financing changed a lot too. So there were other things.
Financing got easier. Like there was more money available.
Well, yes, there were payment plans.
Right. Credit was easier to come by.
When I was in college, I had $150 credit on a credit card. How much did you have in your college when you had a credit card? $2,000.
Yeah.
You see the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't realize it when you pass through it, but it changes. Financing of equipment changes, and it was in the process of changing there. Like I said, I came from a college environment that I had $150 credit, and I moved to an environment that I had several $100,000.
And they were working land deals and stuff like that. Question really quick. What type of equipment, the original dealership, wasn't it just a service shop?
No, it came, the 5020 was their marquee tractor. They had the 4010 had just come out, and the 4020 was a workhorse.
But you guys started as a John Deere dealership?
Oh, yeah.
So when they went into business, your dad, those two partners, how did it go like with the John Deere contract? Was the guys from Deere coming down to Old South Florida?
Oh yeah.
Listen, you got to back up a little bit too. Even John Deere company, you talk about humble beginnings. They had humble beginnings. Every John Deere dealer most of them have humble beginnings of just the same situation he's talking about, but just through all agricultural throughout the whole country.
Right.
So it wasn't this concept of corporate John Deere. It was guys surviving. And John Deere was a young company trying to survive along with them, because it started as a plow. That's what John Deere started as a plow that was self-scouring that didn't get that the soil didn't stick to it. That was really the beginning of it.
When did the self-scouring plow
Like
1867 or something?
63.
Yeah, some.
1837.
Yeah, 1837.
So, I mean, you think all the way up to this point, you're now in the you're 100 years later, basically.
Yeah.
And now they've gone.
But they're just moving from that old putt.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean,
The Waterloo Boy was their first tractor. They didn't develop it.
they bought it. They bought it from Waterloo Boy who developed the tractor. They brought that into the fold.
Okay.
And again, it was the whole thing was different to his point. All of that was different. So the guys from John Deere were not the guys from John Deere. It was basically.
It was maybe one dude.
Yeah, yes,
Y'all
exactly.
knew.
That's right.
Yeah, the manufacturer.
Well, there was a dealership over in Pompano and a dealership over in Fort Myers, a John Deere dealership, and they were servicing. Daddy had an A and a B that came from the 30s. From the 30s, he got them, and we had two or three later models. But I mean, still that old horizontal. But
Why did you choose John Deere?
Daddy thought they were reliable, and like I said, the simplicity to work on them.
Okay. And then, so you guys get into the John Deere contract. How do you start selling tractors?
Well,
What's
Don-
y'all's game plan? Or
Don-
you weren't
Oh no,
there.
yeah, you didn't get him into when, because it happened pretty quick after that Granddad and they said we're out, and then he got in. You need
Okay.
to finish
Yeah.
that.
How does that transition go?
Well, again, W.L. Cunningham was in changing positions at that time, but had a lot of experience with growers all over South Florida. And so he was hunting a job. Daddy was there. And Fritz still had a barn, but all he wanted was rent on his barn, and Don wanted out because they were in the process of developing they built a machine shop. Don Williams was big on machine shop. Okay, things that weren't working real good, so I'm there. I shut the machine down. I fired Don, and I tell Fritz he's on COD.
What is COD?
Cash on demand. That's what it was.
But, because I don't know from nothing. But I know that to operate, you have to have money. I can add and subtract. If I need anything, I ask my wife.
And on top of that, his wife was telling him he was stupid.
So, okay, so keep going. You shut this machine shop down with Don.
Yeah.
Well, he shut down all of the other stuff. The stuff that wasn't core John Deere business. He understood simple.
They had a machine shop. They had a tire dealership. They were selling tires and all this stuff, but they weren't selling.
But why did you have the right to come in and do anything?
Daddy, like I said, the older and the younger are here. The older know better. The younger too stupid to know. So
You were working with them?
I worked with Daddy, and we were trying to get financing. That's how it started. But I was the manager. I took over as manager, and WL came in as sales.
Okay, so that's where you left out. You were farming, and then all of a sudden you and WL entered this partnership of all these guys trying to do a dealership and do some other things.
Yeah.
And this is when you're like, okay, machine shop, no. Tire shop, no. WL used to sell equipment.
I never sold equipment, but he knew the farmers.
He sold produce.
WL's comment was, I'm a farmer's friend. And I think that's the philosophy I hear you all spouting with this. That was WL's comment. He meant it.
Right.
I mean, he would feel as bad from a grower in Immokalee or Belglade or whatever if they had problems as if it were his own. And he had a lot of ingenuity about him. He was very, very good. It was good for us too. And his wife came in and was our bookkeeper. They had three. Daddy was big on bringing in somebody, so he brought in a cousin for a bookkeeper, and the cousin brought his daughter and another one for the bookkeeper. So we had three bookkeepers there, and he'd bring his accountant in. I don't have a need for my.
What do you mean when you say he was big on bringing in somebody? Do you mean bringing in like family or bringing in?
Well, he brought the man because
you've seen the show Entourage. He's an entourage man, and you got to pay the bills. And this guy understood. I got to pay the bills. I don't need entourage. I need somebody to do the books. Let's get on with this. And Jackie is who he's talking about. Jackie is WL's wife. Woo. She was serious business, okay? Serious business.
Very good, very smart. She just high school, but she was valedictorian of her class out of a school in Georgia.
How old were you and WL in this story?
Well, WL was 10 years older than me, but I was like 25.
Jeez, 25.
But it was still, here's the beauty. It was still a simple, I won't say, it was just still a small business. It was a small part of what he was doing.
It wasn't any business. It was an opportunity.
Yeah.
It is what we made it.
Yeah. And so at this point, you come in, you're like, let's focus on the dealership. You're also farming.
Hey, we tried to get a small business loan. We didn't qualify. I have, with Daddy's help, I had a PCA loan. And I had some liquidity because of that. After the storm wiped me out, so I had to sell my farm down there, and so in '63 and '64, I lost my farm down there where I sold it, but because of the sugar industry, I got cash money. I sold it for cash and paid all my bills, and I went in and was renting land in '63 and '64. So I'm closing out that farm, farming some rental land, taking over the dealership of the tractor place, trying to get money, kissing everybody I can, and paying them tomorrow, not today. It sounds overly simplistic, but I paid every bill that I owed. I never beat anybody out of a penny that I know of.
Right. So what was the first, let me ask you this, what was the first big deal that you did?
Atlantic Sugar. We had like 30 tractors out there, and we would give them 24 hours downtime, or we'd put a piece of equipment there.
So you sold 30 tractors to Atlantic Sugar, and this is how many years after that? 63. What year was that?
I don't remember.
That was maybe 10 years
I would say it's probably
you
10
guys-
years because the sugar industry was coming along a little
It
bit.
started in '63.
Yeah. Well,
But it was developed.
but he was selling to all of the all along this time, all these other guys similar to him are doing the same thing. You know, they're developing land. So and as he said, he knew them all. And I'm going to tell you what he's always done. He understands his strengths and weaknesses, and he understands people. WL was incredible at selling and developing relationships with the farmers. He would sell equipment, and they trusted this guy to do the right thing. So it was an incredible partnership. You know,
See, I'm farming on rented land. I had 1,000 acres rented. I think my rent was like $60 an acre. I get $700 an acre now. You see the difference of value. But I had some big equipment that Atlantic Sugar, in wet weather, they needed some more crawlers, so I'm renting my big equipment to Atlantic Sugar, and also it gives us an no, the biggest deal was Sam Knight's deal. It was before Atlantic Sugar.
that was 40/20s or something, wasn't it? A bunch of 40/20s.
Yeah.
Can I ask you this? Was there any other people trying to sell equipment around you?
Oh, yeah. Alice Chalmers was big.
And there was another farming family in Belgrade doing the same thing?
I know.
So you guys were the local footprint who took on a John Deere contract. And if I'm a local farmer, I believe in John and believe in WL versus like some sales guy.
They were there. They were there.
doing
I think, I don't know that they
They
were there. And that makes a big difference because to his point, it wasn't stuff, you couldn't just go all over the place. They were there.
No.
Hey, let's go.
I tell you, one of the big growers at that time kind of objected for us selling equipment because we were farmers, that we would take unfair advantage of it.
Wow.
But ultimately, he bought equipment from us. But
Yeah.
so that feeling was there that we shouldn't be in it.
Right.
So it's both sides of it.
And then how does, just talk a little bit about your selling tractors, but now how does parts and service develop into this whole equation?
Well, but see, we think parts are important, and I think we've historically did a good job of making parts available.
Here's the beauty of it. Okay. Number one, he farmed first. He understands the challenges that a farmer goes through, and the challenge of a part not being on a shelf when a tractor that you're planting with needs to be planting. He understands the pain of that. So that concept is always try your very best to have that part available to make sure that farmer can do what he needs to do because he understands that side of the fence.
Right.
So the bad part of it, like he's talking about earlier, where everybody was kind of upset or people were upset because he farmed and did it, that went away real quick because he understood service, that piece of equipment, no matter what it takes. I mean, he talks about him and WL staying all night, changing out a piece of equipment, fixing a piece of equipment because they knew that farmer had to have it. When people see that kind of stuff, they go, that's my guy.
See,
I'm going to go with those guys. That's the difference.
some of the dealerships that we bought out, Immokalee in Fort Myers, McClellan. I should remember. Anyway, I don't. Anyway, they helped us, but we didn't always pay them on time. It was we was help, and ultimately, they were bought out by a group out of Homestead who was, how do you say foreigners?
They were foreigners.
How did you guys? So what is some of the original conversation about like stocking parts? I mean, like you have a barn, and how does this evolve? I mean, today we stock millions of dollars in parts.
Well,
we use the index card to locate our parts, and
yeah, but again, there's a bunch of dynamics here. The pieces of equipment were not nearly as
sophisticated.
Yeah, as sophisticated as what we have today, which I think is terrible, but it's not we don't manufacture, so it doesn't matter. But in those days, you had it was a much simpler piece of equipment. And they understood, that's what he's talking about. They knew the problems you had with pieces of equipment, so they could look and go, okay, I want this for the clutch, I want this for the engine, I want all these different things.
Okay, I got a question. You order a tractor back in this day. How does the tractor get from John Deere to us?
Say, how does it
If
work?
you order a tractor as a farmer, how does the tractor get from where they're manufacturing it to us?
Well, it comes either railroad or by truck, and we've done both kinds.
At that time, it was probably railroad. If I had to guess, I'd say it's railroad.
Yeah,
to a
we
certain
unloaded,
point,
yeah.
and then actually, and I don't think they didn't have boats, but they had, we have since then, we still use railroads some, not much now. Most of what we do now is over the highway.
And how do you unload it like off the railroad?
There's terminals right there. In fact, we unloaded some out at Duda's farm, and we unloaded some right there by the packing house area in Belgrade, and we cut them off, and they were right there.
And the same would go for parts, right? Because you'd start
Parts come, truck lines.
truck lines.
Truck lines.
Okay.
But parts has always been our long suit. I think when the dealership in the Homestead, they would come up to Belgrade to get parts because the people down there had their analytical sheets and said we don't need to stock that part, and they wouldn't stock it.
So that was one of y'all's big things you did. You understood farming, so you stocked the right parts.
We thought we did, whether we did or not. Yeah.
Tried. You made me think of something. It was, so really in the early days, like today, we have all these parameters around what we stock, and it's digitized, and there's
Yeah, but
reports.
even those, you can change those.
Right.
Here comes but you have to use your managerial skill to say what you have. Do not let them do all the part.
Listen, we still have service technicians that say we should probably stock this. Okay.
Yeah.
Now I will say Deere has something that they just came out with that I think is very exciting to do proactive diagnostics across the country to use those parameters to help you stock parts in the idea of using analytics to see what could happen.
Right.
Which is something that's really, that to me is really interesting. And I'll tell you this, we have never hesitated to stock parts. That's what he's talking about. Some people have, some of the dealerships we bought, they said, oh, we're only going to stock X amount, no matter what, and we wanted to turn so many times. I don't care about the turn. What I care about is having the part at the right time, because at the end of the day, when a customer walks in and he gets that part off the shelf, when he goes to buy a piece of equipment, he's going to think about that, because that's what we want. We understand that. We want to take care of that. So that is something. And also, they have these, some of the dealerships we bought had these analytical programs where they matrix priced up above John Deere list price and all these different things. And whenever we go in there, we'd say, we're done with that. We're going with John Deere list price. That's what we're selling it for. And a lot of the people in that business would complain and go, oh, we can't, we're going to lose this. Well, I'm going to tell you, within one of the dealerships, within 3 years, we had tripled the amount of parts business we did out of that location. Just because, look, man, don't outsmart yourself and don't take advantage of the customer. It's that simple.
Before we get over, we need to understand we are a goods asset for Deere, and Deere knows that. We've been able to pay Deere every time they came, except one time. And when I told them, I'm sorry, friends, there's no money here. Daddy was gone on a John Deere trip, and WL was gone, and I'm sitting there saying, I'm sorry, John Hollowell, but today no check is coming.
Yeah.
So I have been on both sides when there was no money there. But I did make it right, but I am the first to say.
Well, he also signed a check on Peter Pan and Mickey Mouse or something.
So real quick.
There was some. He had some times.
Pause for a second. Back. Okay, so just the summary level is an amazing story, because that's what we're here for, is to tell the story of companies and individuals, and y'all's as a family is you come from North Dakota, your family goes through a serious tragedy. Your father, the guy behind you, at 20 years old, has to find most of his family dead out of the second worst hurricane in U.S. history. and then he decides to keep farming. He farms and does his thing, and then he gets to a point in life where he's got the opportunity to start a dealership and create a contract with John Deere. Then you are in your 20s at that point. You try farming, you farm, and then you also come into this dealership. And this is an amazing story where early on you guys start to land some sizable tractor deals because there's a lot of other families in Belgrade doing the same thing. And we went through that awkwardness of you guys being farmers and tractor dealers at the same time. And then just walk us through, because today, and we'll let you talk a little bit, Mike, we are 18 dealerships right now, and we're called a dealer group. And there's a lot of us throughout the nation. I think it's really cool to hear the story. I'm pretty sure those guys would have similar stories just like that. But can you give us the understanding of how we go from one small dealership that made a 10-deal tractor deal to 18 locations?
Well, the motivating factor is that we got to the point with our family and the problems associated in our families, and I realized that I needed to be liquid. And so I sold a farm for $18 million.
Well, hold on. So I came back in 1989. Okay, he had developed one of the most successful single store John Deere dealerships in the country. But a lot of that was due to the people in the area and the area. It's incredible fertile soil. It is a absolute diamond in the rough of area for farming. It's unbelievable. So, he had developed that, and he's developed his farming along the way. He's continued to farm, and he's continued to grow the John Deere business through WL. And when I got there in '89, WL had retired, and he brought in Roger Cunningham to be the general manager at that time. And Roger had worked with him before in the service department, and then he went to another company, and then he came back in Roger Walker in 1989. So he came in about 6 months before I got there. So really it was that next level of growth probably started about 89. We didn't really start growing till 2000. In 2000, we went through securing more business. Roger Walker was another
Single dealership in Belgrade. So help us understand the idea of this in 89 where you get involved. I want to hear about your brothers, Roger Walker is a pillar of it, and what happens between 89 and when you guys make your first growth move.
Well, my two older brothers were working at the farm. So he still had couple thousand acres out at the farm of where they were working at the farm. So he grew celery, he grew green beans, he grew sweet corn, he grew sugar cane. So they did all that. So they were really working more at the farm. And I came in 89, and I kind of worked a little bit at the farm, but then I was at the dealership too. So I started back at the dealership, and really for me it was really a great time because Roger understood people. As I said earlier, one of his strengths is people. He understands people. This guy is rock solid, and he hires people that are good at what they do. Roger Walker was an incredible salesman. So you went from WL, who was a rock star salesman, to Roger Walker, who was a rock star salesman, and he taught me a lot of things about dealing with people. So for me, it was just a blessing because I had this guy that I had mentored a lot all through life for, and then I had Roger Walker who taught me a different perspective on how you deal with people. So so we went, myself, Roger, and Adrian Puig were selling at the time. So he had a absolute perfect crew at Belglade that was a well-oiled machine that was really doing what it was supposed to do. Again, one of the largest dealerships already in single dealerships in the country. So it was already established.
So when you're one dealership, like just generally speaking, how many tractors were y'all selling a year at this point?
Oh, well, we started a rental fleet deal that came around. So we were probably in the 200 to 300. We were selling a lot of tractors.
Yeah, because you said, just this is 89. In the previous 20 years, your first big deal was 10 tractors.
Actually, it probably wasn't that many at that time. It was probably less than that. It's probably 100 something. And I'm guessing, I'm ballparking
Right.
here, so I'm not 100% sure. But we had established relationships with, large sugar companies, vegetable guys. You in this area, and today, you have some of the largest vegetable growers in the country. You have some of the largest sugar producers in the world. So our area is blessed with incredible farmers.
What did selling a tractor look like at this point? Like the farmers would call in. How many options were there? Like
There was not a lot of options. And one of the first tractors I sold was to Hunley, Mr. Hunley, John Hunley and Hunley Farms. And I think I want to say
it was in the Ag Hall of Fame, right?
yes, he is. And I think it was a 4055. I don't know. I started in the lawnmowers and I graduated to that, but they had a relationship together. So it was kind of an easier sell, but I think it was like $40,000 or something. And we're talking 150 horsepower.
Like
tractor
today
now.
we have quote system that you can look at the cost.
No, we were all on a yellow scratch pad, and you had a book that had
A,
options in
B,
it.
C, D.
So you had to go through the book and pick the option, write it down. Pick the option, write it down. So then you'd come through all of your. So everything was on
What
paper.
would you present to the customer?
You could type something up.
Well, would you? I mean,
Yeah, we type up some.
Yeah, Roger
some-
made a form. He
Yeah,
did it.
yeah.
Roger, that was Roger's
Yeah.
innovation.
Okay.
The sales.
And then and how would they actually order their parts? They would call them in. I mean,
Well, he said there's a microfiche, and that was a thing that John Deere would send out that it was like a light that shined, and it would let you pick what parts you needed. So it would have a diagram, and it'd pick what parts you needed. And again, that was right when I got there, and that was early. We got on a computer system probably not.
That was it. Jackie and I went to Atlanta to be trained on the computers when we went to the computer system, and that was a hands-on deal that it changed a lot.
y'all
of
did have. I mean, you have phones at this time. You have wire phone like your.
Oh yeah,
Yes, you had.
Landline.
yeah, but it's a phone this
Landlines.
big. Yeah,
And they would call in and they'd say, "Hey, I need some parts."
personal contact was our best asset.
Oh, because you were out there. That was one of the big things. You were at the field.
First off, everybody knows him, and I'm not just saying because he's here. He's a man of integrity, and he's a man of God. He walked the walk. A lot of people talk the talk. He walks the walk. So people see that. So there was no, people like that. So he always did what he said, and he did the right thing. And then he had WL and Roger that stirred things up a little bit. They were out amongst the people, and he's out amongst the people. So it was,
But they were
the right thing.
Hands-on people everywhere. They were out on the farm. They were out.
Now talk about
Now
your-
we have a representative that represents us. Then we did it.
Yeah.
What about your growth? I mean, talk about how'd you go from one to any more?
Well, in
dealerships?
2000, around the 2000, and again, he's still farming at this time, just so remember that. So, because that's what he mentioned earlier. But 2000, John Deere came up with a vision that you either grow or you go. And we were not wanting to go. Okay. We were like, I mean, I'm still young. I have you, I have Allie, I have 3 kids. I need to do the same thing he was doing. And I liked it. So it's like, well, let's grow. So we began discussions with groups around us that were not going to grow. John Deere didn't really want to see them grow. They were pretty comfortable with who we were as a company. So we began discussions, and we really wanted Immokalee. Immokalee was a store just like Belglade. It was very similar, sister store to us. So we really were focused on negotiations with those guys. They had 3 stores, one in Immokalee, one in Fort Myers, and one in Homestead. Well, in the meantime, we started some discussions with our dealer to the north who had 3 locations in Okeechobee,
No man.
Fort Pierce, and Stewart. And it worked out where those negotiations went a lot faster than the other ones. So regardless, within 1 year, we went from 1 location to 8 locations because and during that time we were building in Loxahatchee. So we went from 1 store to 8 locations in 1 year.
How'd you pay for this?
Well, we
Sold
did
the
that.
farm.
Well, that's what he's getting to. At that point we have credit. So we did a lot of credit deals, and we had some cash. I mean, he had a successful business, so we did, you know, through the years, if we add things, we build a building, or we'd reinvest in our infrastructure, you know, to service the customer better. So we had some resources, but we had debt. We took on debt at that time, which really somebody here, and it's not me, was not a big fan of at that time because he'd already been through all of that thing. So basically, a matter of fact, the only time I ever got really upset with someone in this room, he called me a big shot. He said I was a big shot, and it was really like, hold on a second here. You know?
I didn't think they negotiated in strength.
Yeah. So it was not a good situation. So anyway,
And they were right.
I don't know.
Worked out.
Well, but sometimes that's one of those things. You think you want something, all of a sudden you get it, you go, holy cow, what in the world? You know, so really you just get back after the thing that you focus on.
This is his first forte into financing because Elder's brother died unexpectedly about this time. And I came home and we were talking, and I said, I'm hunting cash. Mike said, well, Deere's got a financing, and I guess that's the first time we used Deere's financing. So that was his forte, first time on getting financing.
As for like the younger entrepreneurs in here, talk to Boeing do this, but what was the risk assessment like for taking on debt like that?
Well, if you
Lose everything.
well, that was it. It was either, I mean, really, there was not a lot of discussion about it. It was more about the right thing to do for us was to grow because we saw the opportunity. We were stable in Everglades, stable. I mean, and he was farming stable, but we saw the opportunity, you know, and I liked it. So let's go. So for me, it was like I saw the advantages of us growing and centralizing things and letting the people at stores focus on taking care of the customer. In other words, they would sell equipment, they would stock parts, they would service the equipment. We would do all the stuff in the background to get it off of their shoulders. So to me, it was a natural business decision.
It gives us
for
buying power and also discount with volume.
Right, with volume.
Volume is very, very important.
What we're going to do here is, because we'll have to bring this to an end, but I think we can break this up into a section. Like today, we really got the history of Everglades. And then if we want to come back, we can get into like the modern dealings of like a dealer group and a lot of these dealer problems.
Well, y'all will have to participate.
That's right. So just really quick to make sure we get it. Is that okay with you? Is that good? Yeah, because I mean, I feel like today we got all the way up to the point where, you know, you guys took it from one dealership, you went to 8 dealership, and then, I mean, to wrap it up is from 8 to what we are today is 18, is one acquisition after another for the next, 15 years after that? Because this was done in 2000.
Yeah, but let me, just real quick, he mentioned selling the farm because that really gave him a level part of the farm. I want to make that crystal clear. He sold part of the farm. So it really, and it was good for us too, because we were making business decisions and I didn't want business decisions to affect his life. So it gave him a really good level of comfort to sell the farm, pay all his debts off, and still have a little bit of cash in the bank. So he was taken care of. We were growing the business at that point, and it had to stand on its own 2 feet for the most part. We still owed him some money along the way, but it really cleared the water where he was taken care of. We were doing our thing. We could grow as we want to, and he did not, just for clarification, we still farm today. He still has a section of land basically in 2 different places that we still farm some of it and rent some of it out. So we still understand that.
I went from nothing to have $10 million that I could put it in as an investment and still have an operating business over here. So it made a world of difference.
Right. And I think that, the thing that we see and we always talk about, and I think this podcast really illuminated it, was, I mean, that ultimate sacrifice every generation. And you went all the way back to like where your family got on a train, packed their bags, and hauled from North Dakota to Fort Lauderdale. All the way moving through all those things we just talked about to where now you guys are buying 8 dealerships. And it's a different type of struggle now, but it all kind of goes back to those original decisions that people had to make, just one step at a time to have new opportunity.
I'm going to tell you one other thing that we cannot take for granted or or the fact that from the get-go, there was a blessing and a leaning on God.
Yep.
That they believed in God, they trusted in God, and they lived their lives to honor God. Everybody wasn't perfect, no doubt about it. But there was always the understanding that God was involved, and whatever it was, there was thankfulness for that. So that should permeate all of that trail you just talked about. It started way back then and kept going all the way to this point today.
Well, it says it right there on the sign. A God-fearing man came to the city in 1919. Probably could have looked at that for
That would have
when we referenced. Well, I think that would be the conclusion of our conversation today. Let me just look through just for on camera to see if there are any of these questions we actually had. Or go ahead.
No.
We can edit it any way you want for right now. We went through all that.
Well, thank you, Bo. I'm impressed with your presentation.
It was your presentation. We laid the platform down. You guys have seen farming. You've seen farming. You've seen it, multi-generation here. Speak a little bit. Last thing we'll say, speak a little bit about how you feel about the future of farming and where it's going.
Farming is a necessity of life. If you don't eat, you don't die, you don't live. I mean, that's the bottom line. We've not figured out a way that you can live without eating. The production and recognizing your national security is predicated on people eating. So agriculture is going to be there. How it's operated does pause a little bit of thought of how it's controlled, who controls it.
That's what I would echo. The scariest thing for anybody listening to this podcast is you better understand food does not come from the back of the grocery store. Food is produced in a field somewhere. And I think we all got a taste of it. If we think back to the COVID years when those ships were offshore and they couldn't come, and all of a sudden we had empty shelves in our country, and we're talking 2 or 3 years ago. That is frightening. If we ever get where we don't control our production of food in this country, we could have major problems. So the takeaway for me is, agriculture will be there, no doubt about it, but we better not take it for granted, because it is, to his point, a matter of national security. And where technology is going to take us, we're going to continue to improve the yield off the same acres or reduced acres of land. So we're going to have to produce more food for more people off less land. Technology is the only way that's going to allow us to do that.
Thank you, guys.